Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. So we're going to continue where we left off last week. We were right in the middle of, I think, the financing, talking about loan amounts and how we fill that out. So we're going to jump in right there again. And you should be looking at right now the paragraph 3E1 where we were doing the financing. And okay, so last week what we talked about was really we talked about kind of all of this, you know, how the initial deposit, the increased deposit, if by chance there is an increased deposit, and the loan amount, how that math totals up, right? So with this one, we did kind of easy math, right? It was a $900,000 sales price. It was an initial $10,000 deposit. $17,000 was going to be deposited when we removed all of our contingencies by using the increased deposit. So our loan amount is $810,000, which was 90%. We decided it was going to be a 10% down. And that would show here our balance of the down payment at 63 because that is the difference between your loan amount, your initial deposit amount, your increased deposit amount, and the rest of your down payment. So just kind of get the math in order there. So remember, the last thing we talked about when it came to the financing is to make sure that you have an appropriate interest rate in this section because, just to reiterate, because this is where we ended last week, is that interest rate can affect the ability of the transaction to close, right? Because if we accept an offer that has too low of a maximum interest rate, not to exceed, right, a certain percentage, and when they get their final approval, the interest rate does exceed that number, then it does give them an opportunity to be able to cancel the transaction even if they've removed all their contingencies. So we want something that makes sense. So again, piece of advice for this example, let's say it's a 6.5%. So we're going to put a 7% maximum interest rate, right? I'm going to go up a quarter or a half a point. Rates are a little, they've been lately, you know, a little volatile, I guess you would say. They're moving quite a bit. So maybe you want to give yourself that 0.5% cushion. And then the conversation with your buyer becomes, the reason we do this is because in case the interest rate changes during our transaction, you're still committed to purchase. We're just going to put a limit on what your commitment is, right? We're not going to go above this amount. All right. So that's it for the how we fill it out. Now, it says buyer to pay up to blank points to obtain the rate above. If you're paying any kind of points to get the rate you're getting, you've got to state what those points are in there, right? If you're not paying any points for anything, then you can leave that blank. That's okay. That's not an issue. Default loan amount is conventional, but if this is an FHA or a VA or any other kind of financing, you want to check off that box. If it is FHA, in this case, we're still putting 2% down, but they could maybe be using FHA. If it is FHA, you want to check that box because what that does now is it includes the FHA amendatory clause and the form for the home inspection, right? For your protection, get a home inspection because that's required. So it's going to add those two forms automatically in. They should be added on here now. It's got all my, should have been added when I clicked that, but it doesn't look like it moved over. But those forms should be added to your transaction for you to fill out, okay? You know what, as a matter of fact, let me bring up the FHA VA. FHA, it's not in there, so let's add it from here. And we're gonna add that just so that we could look at it. On the amendatory clause, you got to make sure that when you're writing your offer, that the offer price that you're writing matches this base here, because what that does is it protects your initial deposit from any appraisal issues on FHA. Okay. And just a side note, in the past, I have said in other contracts that we've talked about where, you want to counter and put new FHA amendatory clause. I got to say, I made a mistake, and the FHA amendatory clause has to match whatever purchase price that we've agreed to. So if this purchase price gets reduced in counters or increased in counters, we've got to amend that FHA amendatory clause. So that's just, again, I wanted to bring that up because I have mentioned in the past and I made a mistake. So I want you guys to be clear on it going forward. So just know that if you ever have anybody that's FHA and is writing offers over your original asking price and you have concerns about appraisal, even if they remove their appraisal contingency and they have FHA, the chances are they're not going to lose their deposit if they can't afford to pay the difference. So you got to keep that in mind when you're working on those. Okay, so sidebar, let's get back to writing. Okay, so back to the purchase agreement where we were. Sorry if I'm moving fast here and making anybody dizzy, but I got to get back to where we were. Okay, so that's the financing. Just make sure, went too far. Just make sure that you've got all of this stuff filled out when you're writing the offer. Okay? And let's move on. If you do FHA, the lender required repairs are not a separate form any longer. They're part of your request for repairs. So just know that you've got to make sure that your appraisal is done prior to you submitting a request for repairs, or else you have to submit a second request for repairs if there's anything on there for lender required repairs. Additional financed amount. Right now, there is no second financing. Like there's no second trust deeds that are going that are the norm, and when we're talking about like down payment assistance and things like that, like the grants that people have talked about before, and any kind of down payment assistance programs that come from CalHAFA or anything like that, those don't go in your offer as additional financing. All right, so balance the down payment. Additional financing, don't worry about that. Nobody's doing second trust deeds right now. And just so those of you guys that are unfamiliar with what that means, back in the old days before the 2008 collapse, right? And back in the early 2000s, people were buying stuff and we were calling it 100% financing. But what it was a first trust deed and a second trust deed. Okay. And that's how they were using financing to purchase the property. So basically what they were doing is they were financing their down payment, right? So they would do an 80% loan, a 20% down loan, and that's how they would be able to purchase their property with 100% financing with basically very little or no money down. And in some cases, they were financing 103% of the value of the property they were paying for closing costs. But that's where we would put the information in for a second trust deed. If that existed, if they were still doing those, or if those start to come back, you're going to put the amount that you're financing in. You're going to put whether it's a fixed or an adjustable rate, and then you're going to put a rate it's not going to exceed, just like you would with the first trust deed. It's filled out exactly the same way, okay? The next one is the occupancy type. This is where we're stating whether or not this is going to be our primary property or a secondary home or an investment property, right? Like, is this a vacation home or is this an investment property? Now, you got to make sure that you're being honest when you're writing your offer, because it is different financing for somebody who's going to make this their primary residence as opposed to a vacation home or an investment home. We got to be honest. We have to tell the truth when we're filling these out. So ask your clients. I'm sure that most of you know when somebody is buying it for their primary residence or a vacation or investment property. Okay. Balance of down payment. Again, the $63,000 is the rest of our down payment that is owed, right? The 10% down that we're putting, it's minus this $10,000 we've already done and the $17,000 that we will do. That's how much more money we have to bring in for our financing for the balance of our down payment. Okay. Pretty straightforward, that math. Okay. Any questions on this first page? Please make sure that your buyers initial these pages before you submit the offers. But any questions on this first page before I move on to the next? Okay. All right. Next. I don't know why, But this seems to be the most missed portion of a purchase agreement. When I see offers from outside, even sometimes when I'm reviewing your offers, people aren't asking for their closing cost credits here. They're still writing them here, or they're going all the way down here and writing them here, that they're asking for some kind of a credit. Any credit that you're asking for, closing costs, to buy down a rate, whatever it is you're doing, this is where that seller credit goes in paragraph 3. Remember, I want to reinforce that. We talked about it last week. All of this is still paragraph 3. So if I'm looking at paragraph 3G1, this is where I'm going to request any seller's credits. Okay? Anything that I'm going to ask for. It's going to, by default, be applied to closing costs. If you want it to be, a rate buy down, you would just change that. Okay? Or you can leave it at closing costs and use the money that you're going to have to pay to buy your rate down and just leave it as a closing cost credit. Okay? That's it. That's all you got to do. These percentages right here, they're not what is binding in the contract. It's just more for calculation. So it's the number. So pay attention to the dollar amount that you guys put in. That's what we're going to put in for credits. That's where the credits go. That's the only place they go. Don't write them anywhere else in the purchase agreement. So if you are requesting a credit, in this case, we'll say it's just $10,000. We're requesting a $10,000 credit, and we want that to be for closing costs. That's it. Plain and simple. Okay? Very straightforward. Now, additional financing terms here. The only thing that's going to go here is anything that has to do with the financing itself. For the majority of the deals that we're going to do, the only time you're going to write anything in here is if maybe they're qualifying for down payment assistance. Buyer to qualify for down payment assistance. Or, and I spelled qualify wrong, or if you know the special program that they're getting, whatever that program is, if it's some kind of special program that may change the amount of time it takes for us to qualify or may change the parameters of the qualification, we need to put it in there. The other thing would be is if we had written this offer like it was cash because we're getting a hard money loan, you could write in here, even though you're not going to check out because you're not going to check off all cash earlier. So if we're getting a hard money loan, we're not checking this off. Okay. So let's assume that for this one, let's say, okay, we're going to get a hard money loan. So there is no first trust deed here, right? There is no FHA. There's nothing. We're going to pay cash. That's how we write it because this is going to be a hard money loan. So now what I would write here is buyer is obtaining private money financing. And the reason is I have to disclose that is because I have got to show proof of funds. And obviously if I don't have the $800,000 or $900,000 that I'm going to purchase the home with, I only have maybe the $90,000 or a little bit more, $100,000, whatever it is, because of closing costs. I've got to show proof of funds. Well, if I don't disclose that it's hard money, then my proof of funds is really going to be that approval from the private money financing, from the hard money lender, that's going to show what the conditions are of how I get the money and in what period of time, right? So if I don't disclose that, then was I telling the truth when I submitted my offer by writing it as if it was cash, even without checking all cash? No, I'm not being clear with the seller. So we've got to disclose that if we're going to have an offer that is hard money loan, okay? Has to be that way. Okay, next up, the next one that's most confusing for everybody. And again, I know we're writing an offer a couple months, right? Because in August, things are probably going to change with the purchase agreement and things are going to change. That's okay. We'll go back over it in August. But for now, you guys are writing offers just like this. And the SPBB, this section, paragraph 3G3, seems to be the most confusing for people still at this point. This section, if I wanted to check this box, the seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement, that's not having to do with anything with the compensation that's currently in the MLS. Okay, it has nothing to do with that. There's a reference to it when we get to the SPBB, and maybe we'll go over the SPBB for a moment. But this is only to be checked if the buyer you're writing this offer for has a buyer representation agreement with you, has promised to compensate you. That compensation exceeds the compensation you're being paid by the MLS, and your buyer is requesting the seller to pay their obligation to compensate you as agent. If that is not the scenario in the offer you're writing, do not check that box. That is the only time. So what that's saying is, by checking that box, is you're now having to supply a buyer's representation agreement, a separate form called the SPBB, and you're requesting that the seller have an additional fee that they have to pay. In the market that we work in currently, forget about what's going to happen in August, but in the current market that we're in, the majority of the offers you're writing are being offered in the MLS with compensation being paid by the listing broker. Unless you have some kind of crazy additional compensation that the buyer is obligated to pay you, and the buyer is now asking for maybe an increase in the purchase price to cover that, that is the only time you're going to check that box. No other time. Okay? So from now until August, you don't check that box unless it's absolutely necessary. And I would say for 99.9% of you, it is not at this moment. Will that change come August? 100% it will. Is it the fact now? No. Okay, Jesus, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
From now until August, that means that we're not gonna, it's not gonna be July, but August?
Yeah, it looks like right now it got moved to August 17th. That was the last thing.
Good. Thank you.
Uh-huh. All right. Anybody have any other questions about paragraph 3G3, about the SPBB? I'm hoping that the 41 people on here are never going to have an issue with that ever again. And I get it. It was confusing because it kind of just came out of nowhere. And when it first was added to the contract, I think, 8 months ago, a year ago, it was in anticipation of what's happening with the lawsuits and the prep for that. I think it just threw kind of a wrench. People weren't ready for it. But as of right now, that's not something you need to concern yourself with in 99.9% of your offers. And it will change. And I promise you, I'm going to walk you through that change when we get closer to August, or we get to August. Okay? All right. Verification. Oh, one more hand went up. Okay, Darwin, go ahead.
Boss, see what it says, additional finance term. See offers that sell it to contribute or pay to buyer for closing costs, recruiting, not recruiting. Is that necessary to write it down or just to leave it as the way you left it?
You're saying, so besides checking off the box that says a $10,000 credit for buyer's closing costs, I would also, you want to know if you also write
Yes, but it says seller to contribute,
no.
profit. It's not that necessary because I see that very often in my office.
That whole recurring and non-recurring thing is not an issue anymore. That's like an old school thing, and it was based on financing. You just are getting your closing costs paid for. That's it. You don't need to reference recurring, non-recurring, all that stuff. And guys, just so you guys know, recurring closing costs are things that continue to happen: property taxes, interest rate on your mortgage. Non-recurring are the title fees, any of the stuff that the escrow fees, the only stuff that happens for that one time in the transaction. You don't need to do that anymore ever. So no, don't do that. Okay. Verification of all cash, sufficient funds. That's if the property is all cash. This is not about your down payment and closing costs. They're talking about, I want to see your proof of all cash. The default is it's attached to the offer. So when you're writing your offer, if we're going to have a strong offer and a complete offer, if it is an all cash transaction, you make sure that proof of financing is there. The next one is the verification of down payment and closing costs. That's what I'm showing that I have additional cash, right? It could be the same thing, right? If I'm writing all cash and I still need to have closing costs, right? I still have closing costs and I'm still giving you down payment. These two things could be the same. But if there is no all cash offer, if it's financed, this is the only thing you have to worry about. and you're going to still show proof of your funds to be able to cover the down payment and do your own closing costs if the seller is not going to pay any of the closing costs. Now, if the seller's agreeing to the closing costs and your proof of funds only is enough for your down payment and they're going to pay closing costs, that's usually not an issue. If they're not going to pay closing costs and you can't show proof of funds to do that, then there's an issue, right? So just make sure those are attached always. That's part of your offer package. Never leave that off, right? That has to go with your offer. You're starting to reduce counter offers. You're making your offer stronger. The more things that you provide at the beginning that the listing agent doesn't ask for, the better for you in getting your offer accepted. Verification of loan application attached to the offer is the default. Now there is two different things. There's a pre-qualification, which means I talked to a lender, they looked at how much money I make, they looked at my credit, and they say, yeah, we can make this happen. It means they haven't gone any farther than that. That's like the weakest way. The pre-approval means we've gone a little bit farther, and yeah, based on certain things, you're approved. The fully underwritten pre-approval, right, when you get those, that's like, hey, he's all the way approved, we just need to get an appraisal back, and that's it. Okay, so check off what it is that you're submitting so that they can see it. Hey, this is what this is. But know that you're submitting the right thing. Again, remember, we're talking about writing offers so that you guys can have the strongest offer possible to give your buyers an opportunity to get their offer accepted. And understanding what it is I'm providing and making sure I'm providing all the right stuff helps in that cause of it being a strong offer. It's just like this. If I check this box and I don't need to, when I am listing agent and I see this SPBB, at first, there's two things that happen when I see it is either A, they don't know how to write the offer properly, or B, it's going to cost my seller more, so this offer maybe isn't as good as it looked on page one. Okay, so understanding all this stuff is super important for you guys when it comes to strength of offer. Okay, questions about any of these paragraphs that we talked about right now? 3G3, 3H1, 3H2, 3H3. Anybody questions about those? Okay. All right. 3J. Final verification of condition, 5 days prior to close of escrow. Nothing you need to change there. There's no reason you want to do it less, but I know this isn't about writing, but you guys have to get in the habit of actually doing this final verification 5 days prior to closing. Not the day you record, not the day you fund, not, oh, I forgot the day after we close, not if the seller's remaining in possession for 10 days after the seller moves out. You could do another verification. There's a move out for that, but you should still do before you close, before your buyer becomes the owner of the property, you should be able to do a walkthrough and see what the condition of that property is. So I can't stress enough that you have to do it 5 days prior to close of escrow and see where there's at to see if there's any issues, because if not, those issues arise after the close of escrow or the day you're recording or the day you're funding and it's too late to do anything about it and your buyer gets forced to close when there's an issue. It's going to be a bigger issue for you as agent. So please, I got to stress that you got to do it. Okay, assignment request. Again, this isn't about writing, but I had an agent contact me this week and was kind of unsure of what an assignment request was because they had received an offer that said 0 days after acceptance. So does anybody that's on here right now that's listening doesn't know what an assignment request means or what an assignment is? You can raise your hand. It's anybody? Darwin, you don't know what an assignment is? Or you do, or you have a question? Maricela. Okay, so I'm assuming the hand's going up. People are a little confused. All right, so let's do this. Let's talk about that. An assignment request, an assignment is if I am the purchaser and I maybe want to assign this purchase to another buyer, right? That would be the assignment request. I would have in this transaction, and let me take that 0 out, I'd have 17 days in which I can request of the seller their authorization for me to assign this. Now, I could assign it to a completely different person. I can assign it into an entity that I am an owner of. I could send it into an entity that I am a partner of. I could assign it to a completely different entity. Doesn't matter. That's what an assignment is. An assignment is, and you guys see these once in a while, is that, and this is when they call the wholesaling, right? These wholesalers, is somebody goes in, writes an offer, locks up the property, and then turns around and advertises it to a bunch of people, right? Like, I got a great deal on this property, but I don't want to buy it. I want to just make money on it and flip it to somebody else. So they buy it. They lock these people into escrow. They advertise it to everybody and say, I got this great property, and, you know, contact me and we could do a deal. They get paid some kind of finder's fee, and then they assign it from themselves to that new person that they found, right? That's what wholesaling is. It drives me nuts, but whatever. That's wholesaling. Now, the problem with that is I've got to disclose to the seller in my assignment request if I'm getting paid for the assignment I'm making and how much money I'm getting paid for the assignment I'm making. Sidebar, forget about whether or not they choose to do the same or not. Logically, if I'm buying your property from you for $300,000, and then I tell you, by the way, in the middle of this escrow, I'm now going to transfer to that guy, and I'm going to make $20,000 on the transfer, would you be okay with it as seller? Well, wait a minute. If you're going to make if there's an extra 20,000, why can't I have it? The majority of those wholesale deals, I would guess that seller has no idea that the person that they're in escrow with at the moment and is going to give it to somebody else is not getting paid, or is getting paid. They don't know. They don't know. And that's why I have a problem with the majority of those deals. So an assignment request is the amount of time I have to request an assignment from the seller to approve me assigning it to somebody else. Now, the most reasonable assignment and the most common assignment is I have a corporation or an LLC or a partnership with somebody. And when we were first writing the offer, I was like, I don't know if I want to have this as personal property or part of my corporation. And we decide during, hey, I'm going to assign this to my corporation. That's the norm, right? That's the norm. Now, sellers don't have to approve the assignment. That's why it says assignment request. It doesn't say assignment. It says assignment request. I've got to write up. There's a form called Assignment of Agreement Addendum. I have to fill that out. I have to send it to the seller, and the seller's got to sign off and agree to it. That's it. So yes, they do have to approve it, but that's an assignment. So you've got by default 17 days to request one. Does it mean you're going to get it? No. But you have time to request it. So in the case that I was talking about with the other agent, and Jesus, I see you, and I'll get back to you in a second. They wrote 0 in here. And sorry, so they wrote 0 in there. So the agent was asking me, well, what does that mean? It says 0 days after acceptance. I said, well, I think they're trying to imply that they don't have the right to request an assignment any longer. They're trying to tell you, hey, we're not going to assign it. So that would be my assumption. If you want to be more comfortable about it, I would counter back and say seller will not agree to any assignments after acceptance, right? Just say, hey, we're not going to do it. So that's what that is. Jesus, you had your hand up. Now I lost you. There you are. Go ahead.
Okay, I hate to be devil's advocate, but I have to say it because sometimes we come across to possible wholesales. So how would you bring this up in a very nice, polite way to the seller? I know you don't like them.
Oh, okay, so let me ask you something.
We're gonna wholesale because I have a cash buyer.
Okay, hold on. I want to get the scenario. It's your listing. You have the listing.
Yes.
A buyer comes along and says, I want to buy it cash.
Let's say I'm gonna wholesale it. I'm just gonna wholesale it.
Okay, but you got to think of what I'm talking about would be you put your name on an offer and put it in escrow.
Right.
You put it in escrow. And then you go and you farm it out to somebody else, to another cash buyer. And that buyer says, yeah, I'll take it. I'll assign it to me and I'll pay you money. As long as you disclose the money you're going to make and the seller agrees, there's nothing wrong with it. If you don't disclose to the seller, I am making $5, $10, $15,000, then there is a problem that is not legal. So I don't have a problem if people do it right. The reason I have a problem is because, and I've had personal experience with agents here that are trying to purchase a wholesale property, and the listing agent, buyer, whoever, whatever you want to call them, is doing their own forms, which are not CAR forms. They're non-CAR forms. They're not standard forms. And they don't have on their assignments anything to do with money or the exchange of money or how much money they're getting paid. So that's the ones I have a problem with. But if there are true assignments where hey, I bought it and now I don't want to keep it, or I can't afford to keep it, and you find somebody to sign it to, as long as you tell them, hey, I made $5,000 on it, and your seller goes, cool, I'm happy with it, not a problem.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Not a problem. Okay. Let's move on. Sorry, that was a soapbox thing, but it was only because I had that conversation this week that I wanted to bring it up. Okay, loans. Paragraph 3L1, the loan contingency. You have 17 days after acceptance to get your loan in order. It doesn't mean you're going to have full approval in 17 days. What it means is, at the end of 17 days, we feel comfortable that our loan is in a place where we'll be able to close in the next 5, 10, 14 days, whatever it is. Okay? That's what that 17 days is for. Not for you to get everything in order and sign loan docs and say, now I'm going to remove my contingency. No, that's not how it works. 17 days. And if you get to day 13, 14, 16, and you can't feel comfortable to remove that contingency, then ask for an extension. But if I were you, right, if I'm writing a strong offer, and we talked about this last week, is that I suggest that nobody writes an offer that's less than a 30-day escrow period. But if I am writing an offer that is a 21-day escrow, because I see you guys do it, right? I see a lot of people that write these 21-day escrows, and they don't change this timeline. They send it with 17 days. That's not a strong offer. If you're telling me you're going to close in 21, but I got to give you until 4 days prior to we're going to close, that's after you do your walkthrough, technically. That doesn't work for me as a listing agent. Now that just means I have one more thing I have to counter to change your timelines to make them make sense, right? So if you're going to do a 21-day escrow, you got to shorten these timelines to where you feel comfortable, but that also becomes a conversation with your lender. And again, your lender's never... I mean, I don't care how good your lender is. Your lender's probably never going to say, yeah, go ahead and remove contingencies, just because they don't want to be responsible. But if you're in good communication with your lender and you know that, hey, the conditional approval we have is very standard. It's, one or two very normal conditions, nothing that's going to be difficult for us to get, then you should feel comfortable that you could close and you remove that contingency. But you got to address the loan contingency period when you change the escrow period. If you're going to leave it at 30 days, I don't think 17 days is a problem. It's still 2 more weeks before you're going to close, basically, right? So I don't think that's an issue. But when you cut those 9 days off and you got 4 more days that before you close, I think that's ridiculous when I see offers that are like that, 21-day escrow, and then everything is 17 days. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. So again, strength of offer, make it make sense. Make the numbers make sense. 21-day escrow, I got 10 days to remove my loan contingency. I got 10 days to do my appraisal contingency, not 17. I've got 10 days for investigation, or 7 days for investigation, 7 days for my probably 10 days. I got to leave it in case the appraisal has to go out there after 7 days. I got to make sure that makes sense. Okay. Appraisal contingency. Look, guys, I wouldn't, even if I'm trying to write a stronger offer, I wouldn't be the one to say to my buyer, we're going to remove the appraisal contingency. If the seller counters me and says, I need you to remove the appraisal contingency based on your offer price, that's different than me being the one saying to my buyer, hey, we're gonna remove our appraisal contingency because it's gonna make, I don't like that. We know what a property has to appraise. We know it has to appraise if there's a loan involved. And if there's no appraisal contingency, doesn't mean there's no appraisal. It's still going to be the issues. And I understand that contractually what we're saying is by no appraisal contingency that I'm going to pay the difference between appraised value and the offer price. But most listing agents don't take the extra step to show me the extra proof of funds to pay that difference. And we as buyer's agents kind of use it as, well, most of the time listing agents are going to let it go. They'll probably renegotiate anyway because they don't want to cancel and move on with somebody else. So we're going to roll these dice on it. I'm just saying, as an agent, I wouldn't choose to make that removal of appraisal contingency part of a strength of offer. I wouldn't. Okay. Plus, we know with the FVAC, it says, hey, this is the offer price. If it's a FHA property, that appraisal contingency being removed or doesn't increase the strength of your offer. If I'm giving advice to any listing agents right now, I would never remove that appraisal contingency from the beginning. I would just shorten the amount of time they have to do it, put a little pressure on them to make sure the appraisal gets done, so that if it doesn't appraise, I'm not in escrow for an extended period of time before we either have to go back on the market or negotiate a different price. Okay. So if I'm writing an offer, I'm probably on my own. I'm going to shorten this period, especially if I have a shorter escrow period. But again, to show strength of offer, I'm going to shorten this to, somewhere around, 10 or 12 days. Just to show, hey, okay, I'm going to get my appraisal done. I'm going to do it quickly. I'm going to try to get it done as quick as possible. That would be, for me, a stronger way to show, a better way to try to show strength of offer than saying I'm not going to have an appraisal contingency at all. Now, I don't know that, my thought process on the contract is probably a lot different than a lot of people's you're going to be writing offers to out there, and they may see it differently. I just don't think that for you to provide good service and still give a good, strong offer for your buyer, removing any of their contingencies prior to is good service. I just don't think it is. Now, if your buyer comes to you and says, hey, this is what I want to do, because I've tried writing offers with other agents and it didn't work, and this was always what would show up, and and they say, hey, this is what I want to do, and that's how you write the offer, and you verify that conversation with an email, go for it. I just don't like when it's your idea and you're talking the buyer into it and explaining to them why they don't need the appraisal contingency. I don't like that. Okay. The appraisal contingency, obviously, we know it's based on the appraised value of the purchase price. This would be only if we're trying to put some other different price in there. For example, if this is a conventional loan and I'm trying to show strength of offer, right, by saying, hey, I've got money to pay the difference between the appraised value and the offer price if it doesn't appraise, we could say, for example, like I wrote this offer for $900. Let's say that the property was listed for $880. Right? I'm saying to you that as long as I'm going to do an appraisal on the property, I've got 12 days to do that appraisal. I'm not removing my appraisal contingency, but I am only using my appraisal contingency if the appraisal is less than $880,000, your list price. What I'm telling you is that even if it appraises at $895, I'm going to pay you $900. If it appraises at $881, I'm going to pay you $900. I'm going to pay that difference. If it appraises at $879, then we have the opportunity to negotiate before I use my appraisal contingency to cancel and move away from the transaction. That's what that checkbox is for. So if I want to show strength of offer on a conventional loan, for example, where the FVAC doesn't matter, I can say, I only needed to appraise for this. As long as it appraises for that, I'm good because I have the $20,000 to pay the difference. Does that make sense? That's showing a strong offer right there, because now I've committed to the appraisal saying it has to appraise at this. I don't need to remove my appraisal contingency because I'm saying to you, if it doesn't appraise for $900, I can't use my appraisal contingency to cancel unless it goes below $880. I know you guys have questions, so go for it. Who's first? I don't believe you that there's nobody that has a question about that appraisal part. Okay, good. I think we've talked about it enough times. Maybe it's clear for everybody. So that's how I'm showing strong offer. Instead of saying no appraisal contingency, I'm saying I just needed to appraise for this amount and I'll take care of the rest. Okay. Investigation of property. That's the amount of time I need to do all my investigations, which means review disclosures, go to the city, hire any inspectors I want. This is the time I have to do that. Okay. Investigation, 17 days. If I've lowered my escrow period, for sure I have to reduce this period. But if I want to, again, for strength of offer, I could say I'm going to do my investigations in 10 or 7. You could do that. As long as you've had that conversation with your buyer previously, that you're writing this offer and you explain to them, this is what we're doing, and that means we have to, if we get this offer accepted, we've got to move quickly to be able to do this. You've got to have everybody on board, because if you're reducing the time periods for these things, everybody's got to take action quickly, which means if there's some need to go to the city to look at permits, you've got a very limited time to do that. If there's something specific about the property that you want to get investigated, like there's a hillside behind it, right? It has retaining walls and things like that, so you have to get maybe surveyor out there or somebody who gives you can inspect it for the soil stability, those kind of things. You might need more time. So be conscious of the property itself and what you think you may need to do based on the condition of the property when you saw it. So if 7 days is enough, maybe it's 10. If you know that there's a lot of stuff that you want to investigate, leave it at 17. I'm just saying that this is kind of a way to say, hey, look, you don't have to counter me to shorten, because I'm already telling you we're prepared. We've already prepared ourselves to have this amount of time. So let's just say we'll do it in 10. This informational access to the property, this doesn't give them the right to cancel. All it is I can still go in. So let's say, for example, my investigation is 10 days, my appraisal is 12. Even after those two contingencies are removed, if it still says informational access 17 days, I still have the right to go into the property until day 17. After day 17, I can't go in without the consent of the seller. But till that day 17 comes. So probably the best case scenario would be to whatever your longest contingency is, you match it. Okay? That's it. Review of seller's documents. We talked about that during the investigation period. Again, I'm going to make that the same amount of time. Same with the prelim. Okay? If this is a condo or a townhouse, you could reduce it. But remember that those common interest disclosures, like the HOA docs, the CC&Rs, all that stuff, it won't get ordered until your deposit is in escrow, because escrow is going to order that, and they need money to be able to pay for those, to order them. So you figure 3 days, I get my deposit in, that money shows up in escrow's account. Escrow probably the next day or two orders it. You're already 6 days in before, just by the time they've ordered it, for you to be able to review it. Probably not going to happen in 10 days. I would suggest that by the norm, you leave those alone, even though it does say it's 5 days after delivery, whichever is later, right? So even if by day 10 you haven't gotten them yet, whenever you do get them, you'll have 5 days to review them. But again, we all know that it's going to take longer than 10 days probably to review HOA docs. So I would leave those alone. The lease or lien items, again, I would also leave that alone, just because it's going to take the seller a while to get it to you. Again, if you reduce it to 10 like everything else, and the seller doesn't deliver it, on time, then you've got 5 days to review it. Keep in mind, and we'll get to it in a minute. Well, I don't want to jump ahead. Let's just stay on pace with where we're at. Sale of buyer's property, you only need to check this off if your buyer is selling a home to purchase this one, and then that would include the COP form. In this case, we're not. We're just regular purchasers. Okay, questions about anything that we looked at in paragraph 3L? Anybody have any questions? Any questions? Okay, good. Let's move on. Time of possession. This is not occupancy. This is just ownership. Okay? Time of possession. This is if there's a seller-occupied tenants, or if there's tenant-occupied in the units. This is just time of possession when I get it. This is when I get the property, when I own it. So the default is I get it upon the notice of recordation. That's the default. That's it. That's when I am the owner. As soon as it records, I'm the owner. That's how it works. If there's a seller-occupied property, then I have to give sellers, most of the time, I have to give them time after close of escrow. Okay? I would say if it is a seller that is not purchasing a replacement property, it would be 3 days after close of escrow. If it is somebody that's purchasing a replacement property, right? This is contingent on the seller purchasing a replacement property. And we usually know that prior to writing the offers. I would give them 10 days after close of escrow. And if that's the case, then I have to include the form SIP. SIP is good for 29 days. Once I move to day 30 of the seller remaining in possession, I have to go down here to the RLAS. The RLAS is the residential lease after sale. So again, understanding your forms and how things work helps in your strength of offer when I'm writing it. So if someone tells me, the listing agent tells me, hey, by the way, we're going to need 30 days after close of escrow, then I'm going to check the box down here and I'm going to include the RLAS. If they tell me, hey, listen, we need 15 days after close of escrow, I'm putting it up here on this line and I'm including the SIP. Okay? It's understanding which forms I have to provide, how I fill this out, you know, the number of days, do I put it in the right place? And having all that done makes my offer stronger because it's cleaner and it becomes less things that have to be countered. And that's why it's important for us prior to writing the offer to have that conversation with the seller. If they didn't put in the MLS that it was contingent on them finding a replacement property, and maybe we previously forgot to ask them, that's something we asked prior to writing the offer. Hey, we just showed your property. My buyers loved it. We're getting ready to write the offer. Are your sellers buying a replacement home? Is this sale contingent on that? By the way, how much time do they need after close of escrow? Because I want to make sure our offer shows that. Okay? So make sure that you're including the right forms. If it's 29 days or less, the SIP. If it's 30 days or more, it's the RLAS. Use the right documentation. Okay? The tenant occupied property addendum. If there is a tenant in the property, even if that tenant is going to move out prior to close, at the time I wrote the offer, there is a tenant. I have to include the tenant occupied property addendum. I am required to include it. Okay? It doesn't matter if they're going to move out. I know I've talked to people in the past, oh, the tenants are moving out, so that's why I didn't put it. No. That's okay. There's a reference to the tenants are going to vacate the property and which units they're going to vacate, if they are going to vacate units, if it's a single family, if they're going to vacate the property. It doesn't matter. You have to include it if there are tenants. So again, remember, I keep trying to stress, writing the correct forms, checking the right boxes help in our strength of offer. And again, one of the biggest pet peeves I have is people not checking boxes, even if they're including things, you know, commissions and changes to names and all. Please, if there's a box in front of whatever you're writing, please make sure you're checking it. That helps. Okay. Questions about 3M. Anybody have questions about 3M? Any of these? The possession, the close of escrow? Yes, Darwin, go ahead.
Boss happened to me twice this year. The problem is this. I think all those forms had a situation that one was a seller occupied the owner. She didn't leave after the 30 days. Even she mentioned it to me, oh, you can evict me. So that's the thing. So what will you do? And you recommend that I'm like in the position, no, I'm not going to close unless the property is vacant. Happened to the tenant, the same thing. So they left, but it was a hassle, boss.
Yeah, I know it is a hassle. I mean, not to skirt your question, but there's no guarantee that anybody's going to move out. What we're talking about here is writing the offer properly in this class. So it's not like I don't want you guys to ask questions, but it's just we get off track and now we're going to have a third week of writing an offer. But there's nothing you can do about that other than the way you fill out your SIP to help to protect your client as best you can, and that you're clear with your client what it means once the escrow closes with that seller. Now, you saying I'm never going to close until it's vacant. Well, yeah, but that's difficult in this market for any buyer's agent to dictate that they're not going to close. Go buy another house then. If I'm the listing agent and my seller's going to stay, I'm going to do my best to coach my seller to make sure that they're living up to their rights of the contract. But if you tell me, well, I'm not going to do, well, okay, then I'll find a different buyer that will. I think ultimately what happens is just that we're dealing with human beings. There's no guarantees at anything. I don't care what this contract says. It's not like it's not like this contract is magic. If I show the contract to the seller and say, you're violating it, they automatically change their mind. Doesn't matter. What this is here for is to protect ourselves legally, civilly, if we have to. So you have a conversation with your buyer and you say, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, this is what they want for us to have to buy this property, is they want to have this amount of time in possession after the close of escrow. There is a chance that they don't move out in time. What I'm going to request is I'm going to request in the SIP that they leave behind $15,000, $20,000 in escrow as a move-out fee that says they won't get that money until they move out of the residence. Escrow is going to hold on to it. Now, you won't get that money, but they won't either. So it gives them an incentive to move out when the contract says. Okay, that's what I'm going to request. I don't know that the listing agent and the seller are going to accept that, but I'm going to request that to protect you. Now, if they don't, and you're still concerned about the idea, then we'll try to find a property that isn't seller occupied. But I need you to tell me, would you like to proceed? Yes, we would. Terrific. Now we're going to do all of our, whatever we need to do, write the offer, do the things that we need to do. And then I'm going to follow it up with an email to my buyer and say, okay, buyer, remember we spoke about X, Y, and Z, that the seller may not move out, that you might have to wait longer than the 15 days that we're requesting. All of these things. And you're okay, you want to move forward. Yes, I do. Terrific. Now, I can feel comfortable because I've directed my clients and my clients have directed me. What happens is we make choices for our clients on our own. We're the one who says, hey, look, you want it, you have to give them 29 days. And they're like, okay. And we don't tell them what the problems are. We don't tell them what the issues are. And because we want to get our offer accepted, we don't request that move out fee that gets held by escrow. We don't do that. And so we write these offers with zero compensation or zero protections for our buyers to kind of console them if the seller chooses to move out. So all the problems that we have with sellers and with our tenants, or with our buyers and with the sellers, is most of the time our doing, period. Let's see. What about tenants? Can we keep money in escrow? I mean, in what context? I don't know what the context is that you're talking about with tenants. Look, what I will say, and we're going to finish with this, and we'll finish writing the offer next week. Tenants, I'm going to state it again right now. If you are in the state of California, which I assume all of you are that are on this, and you're writing an offer on a property that is tenant occupied, that is 2 units or more, not single family, 2 units or more, and the seller doesn't live in one of the units, you are probably 99% of the time not going to get a unit vacant. There is no mechanism in place legally, well, as far as the state goes with tenants' rights, where I can evict a tenant prior to close of escrow. Period. End of story. Unless that tenant is violating their rental agreement, unless that tenant hasn't paid, there is no way for me to evict them. Now, if I make an arrangement with that tenant and say, hey, we're going to give you cash for keys, you have to be out by this day, they agree to that cash for keys, and this is not talking about LA rent control areas, the rent stabilization, forget that. We're just talking about the state of California. And I go to them and say, hey, we'll give you, $10,000. Will you move out? And they say, yes, absolutely. They sign the cash for keys agreement. That day comes, whatever day we agreed upon. I go there with the cashier's check. They hand me the keys. They move out. I give them the check and they're out. Unless that is agreed to, there is no way to get them out. None. Zero. Now, if I'm the owner and I want to move in, I could do that. So, for example, if you have a buyer that wants to buy something that is 2 units and they want to live in one of the units, once they're the owner, they have the right to evict them to move in and pay them a little relocation. But you guys have to stop as listing agents promising that units are going to be vacant. And as buyer's agents, you've got to stop telling your buyers, yeah, we'll get you 2 units that are tenant occupied and we'll get you one that you can live in. Stop it. Because all you're doing is causing problems. Period. End of story. I talked to an agent before he wrote an offer. The listing agent and he negotiated, hey, we're going to do a 90-day escrow to give us time to evict the tenant. We're 56 days into that escrow, and the listing agent called him and said, I don't think we're going to be able to evict the tenant. And that was exactly what I told him 56 days ago when he wrote the offer. So you guys just have to come to the realization that tenant occupied is going to 99% of the time remain tenant occupied. So if they don't want to move out, they don't have to move out. So leaving money behind doesn't really matter. Okay. So that's just, again, understand that's about tenants. Okay. We're going to finish writing this offer next week. Okay, let's see. Darwin raised his hand. Go ahead, Darwin.
No, that's fine. But that was the question that I had before.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
All right, guys. So, again, we're going to finish writing this offer next week. Sorry, it's taking 3 weeks instead of 2. I thought it would be 2. But we'll finish next week, and then you guys will have a guide for writing a strong offer. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate that you guys spend your hour with me. Have a great day. Be safe, and I will talk to you guys soon.